And our last speaker for this morning is Evan Rosen. He's actually a very good friend of mine and a colleague that I worked with while in certification. He's now the Vice President of Food Safety and Quality Assurance with PacMoore. Prior to that, he worked with Carry Out Company, AIV International, and SCI Global, with over 18 years of experience in quality assurance across a broad range of food manufacturing sectors. He has a master's degree in public administration from the University of Albany State and of New York, and he is a certified HACCP and quality auditor with ASQ, as well as a BRC approved training partner and SQF trainer. Please welcome Evan Rosen.
So first, I'd like to thank you all for sticking with this right before lunch. Nobody ran out the door, so I'll make sure I keep on time so that way you still have some food left up there when we're done. So we're going to talk about validation and verification. We probably heard about this ad nauseum in a variety of areas, and now with FSMA coming online, for the various sizes of companies, there's been a lot of confusion now as to what do we need to validate, what do we need to verify. Are these used interchangeably? They're really not the same thing, and when I took the lead instructor class for the PCQI training, there was some debate there when some of the candidates there were wondering, well, wait a minute, we have to validate our cleaning procedures for GFSI standards. What do you mean we don't have to do that for the preventive controls? So there was some confusion there. So I'm going to go through what those meanings are. This might be a review for some of you, and for some of you this might provide some needed clarification. So again, to reiterate, verification and validation are not synonyms. They mean two very different things, and I'll clarify what those are. Customers, regulatory, and GFSI-based standards have differing expectations, and that can cause a lot of confusion. So just a little comparison here of FSMA versus GFSI certification. So FDA or FSMA sanitation controls require verification, but not validation. It's recommended but not required. GFSI-based certifications require both validation and verification. Doesn't matter whether you're using SQF, BRC, FSSC, IFS, etc. So how do we comply? And that question was, well, oh my goodness, well, the FDA is not requiring that on a sanitation preventive control. Does that mean we don't have to do that anymore? But many sites have certifications that they still have to maintain and customer expectations. And with those, that means you need to take the most stringent of all the requirements and combine them together in a robust system to make sure you're satisfying all the requirements. So we don't want to go backwards. We want to evolve. We don't want to devolve. We don't want to take anything away or water it down. We want to make sure that we're getting the best of everything and making that a robust program that really works. And there's a lot of guidance documents that are out there to help you with that are free, that you can get from various trusted websites, such as the FDA website, the USDA website, BRC, SQF, GFSI, etc. There's a lot of things out there that are in plain language that can really provide some much needed guidance for the industry. So in plain language, validation is, will it achieve its intended purpose? Will it work? Will the SSOP really provide the level of cleaning and sanitizing that we're expecting? And can we replicate it? It's not just a one-off, that we can do this if we follow it each and every time, that it's really going to achieve its intended purpose. So some various examples. This one is for clean in place, and what was mentioned in earlier presentations is that a lot of times there's different expectations on what clean in place is. And so for this example, this is for a fully automated system that might be used in dairies or flavor manufacturers, et cetera, that are able to, from start to finish, have all the various parameters that can be replicated each and every time with precision. And so these are some examples here of what needs to be in place and actually working. Some of the GFSI standards are very prescriptive on what's expected for a clean in place system. So for example, time and temperature, flow rate, pressure, conductivity. sequencing and chemicals all come into play, have to come together and work properly. And so some sites struggle with that. They don't necessarily understand that they need to prove that that's all there. Where did they get the parameters from, and how do they show that they're appropriate? Sometimes they'll use an external chemical company to help them. Sometimes they have the internal expertise to be able to ensure that they can prove that the system will work as intended. And then another example could be with allergens. And so in plants that are dealing with various types of allergens, there's a challenge there. And with allergens, you're usually going to introduce wet cleaning. And so sometimes dry, sometimes wet can be a big challenge. What do you do? How do you prove that you have an absence of the allergenic material before you run something else that is not supposed to have that in there, so we can avoid cross contact? There are various commercial kits that are available, such as lateral flow or ELISA testing, and it's best to use hard-to-reach food contact surfaces. A lot of times with human nature, people do it's easy. So I've gone full circle in industry. I've gone from Carryout Company, which made the Chinese food condiments. I've gone then to AIB International as a food safety auditor. And I've gone back to industry again, and I've seen a lot of different errors that are in there, good practices, poor practices, and people usually do it's easy if nobody's watching or really takes the time to explain what needs to be done. And they'll just take a surface they see in front of them, and they're not going to be that protein and go into those nooks and crannies. And so for those of you that are familiar with sanitary design, you might have heard the most perfect geometric shape that we could have in a perfect world would be a sphere. Unfortunately, we can't design all equipment that way, and so sometimes there are some things that might be older that have right angles or might have surfaces that are not ideally smooth, and you could wind up getting allergenic protein stuck in there. And so what we want to do is train the staff to look for those places and to challenge those worst case scenario places to ensure that we can have an absence of that protein. But not every allergen in every country is a protein. So our neighbors to the north in Canada have sulfites. Sulfites are not a protein in that sense. It's a chemical that you need to be able to test a different way, such as with rinse water. So you want to understand the methods, and you want to understand, is there technology that exists? Can you use the best technology at the time period? Don't rely solely on finished product testing due to the dilution factor. So sometimes it's a common mistake. I used to go to sites and they'd show me, well, there's no allergen in the finished product. But at that point, you're making so much and it's so diluted, you're not necessarily going to know at that point whether you really do have a problem on the food contact surfaces. So you really want to get to the source. If you want to use it as a supplement, that's one thing, but you shouldn't be using that as the only factor. And as a reminder for those that might not be familiar, ATP or adenosine triphosphate is a method of verification, not of validation, because that is only going to be checking for organic matter. That could even be skin cells. So I'll go into that a little bit when we go into the verification part. So verification, quite simply, is did we do what we said we're going to do? Was the sanitation standard operating procedure followed as prescribed? If we said we're going to do something at a certain frequency, we're going to utilize a certain chemical, we're going to utilize specific parameters, that we did exactly what we said we're going to do, because if we don't, then the validation is really not going to help us at that point. We need to be able to demonstrate and prove objectively that we're going to follow as prescribed. So some examples there could be from the start, could be very simple visual inspection. That's the first thing you'd want to do on a surface to make sure we don't have any gross soil that's visible, because any other methods at that point are going to be moot if we do see that there's something out there. So we can do ATP testing, and as a reminder, we want to challenge, do those hard-to-reach areas, but we're not going to use an ATP test if we see that there's visible soil. We're wasting time and money at that point, so we want to make sure that that surface is clean. You can also do protein-specific testing for verification in addition to validation if you have the funds to do so, but that could be costly. It is not necessarily required to do that for both validation and verification, but if you have the means to do so, sure, you can do that for where those technologies are available. But again, before you do that, you want to make sure the surface is clean and that it would pass the appropriate levels of ATP. But what you want to make sure with ATP as well, it is not a standardized unit of measurement. A lot of times sites think of RLUs or relative light units and think, okay, we set this up, this is good across all the plants and all our units. There's a lot of variation there, and you need to be careful if you're going to be considering something like that. And you want to avoid conflicts of interest, of course, as well. So sometimes I've been to sites where the person that's doing the actual cleaning and the sanitizing is also doing the checks themselves, and they're doing the ATP, and they're doing the allergen protein test kits. And that's a problem because at that point, they might be the most honest person in the world per se, but human nature, if you're cleaning and you're re-cleaning and you're having challenges at that point, you're probably going to wind up testing something that you know is going to pass so you can get on with your work. You're probably held to a certain metric, and if you're not meeting that, sometimes people take shortcuts. You want to make sure that it is somebody that's independent of the person doing the activity, and to make sure they're properly trained on how to do that. And of course, the records reflect the actual outcomes. So it's not just enough to look at the records and verify them. It's important to have somebody out there and to watch what they're doing. Is it really matching? Is what they're saying what I'm seeing out there, or do I see a real discrepancy? Are the wheels falling off the cart as I go out there, and am I seeing something that's like night and day? Basic verification for a CIP spray ball, for example, is it in the correct position, or did something happen during the actual process that made it go loose? Is it the correct shape and type? So I mentioned in a previous meeting that sometimes they're the wrong types. They might have various ones for various equipment. Somebody didn't look. They had a whole box full of them, and they put them in the wrong type of equipment. And at that point, it's decorative, and it's not going to achieve its intended purpose because you're not going to get the full coverage in the equipment. And then you might find that there are dirty sidewalls and other types of problems in the equipment as a result. So you want to make sure also that you can inspect and remove them, and make sure that there's no foreign material in them, gaskets, things that could have failed during the process that would show that it didn't work as intended and you might need to repeat. Also damage. I've seen where the spray balls have been misused. People have used them as tools, sometimes during the production process or something else, something gets clogged, and somebody takes it and they use it as a hammer, and now you have a damaged spray ball, and just like using the wrong shape or type, you're not getting the full coverage, and you wind up with a big problem. So this comes straight out of the new regulations in FSMA for preventive control verification, 21 CFR subpart 117.165 in human food, and for our animal food friends, under 21 CFR subpart 507.49. Quite simply, in summarizing, records need to be complete, and they need to be accurate, and they need to be verified by a preventive controls qualified individual or under PCQI oversight. So if you have one PCQI, it doesn't mean now they must do everything and run around like in Bewitched, where you twinkle your nose and you're going in triple speed trying to get everything done. They can have trained people under their supervision that can assist with that. They expect within 7 calendar days, but to me, I feel that's a little bit too long. Do you really want to wait until something's out of your control to find out you have a problem and that you wind up with something that you're wondering what to do about now where it's out of your control? Any types of exceptions need to be documented. So for some reason you need longer than 7 days, or you're going to deviate from the normal procedures, there needs to be justification. So that way, when those records are reviewed, it can speak for itself, whether you're in an audit or whether for some reason you're in court, etc., that someone can be in that room by themselves, look at those records, and they're detailed enough that they can tell their own story with minimal amount of questioning. So supporting records for a sanitation preventive control is not just the monitoring activity. There could be an entire vertical demonstration from start to finish that that preventive control is effective and has the appropriate justifications for all the parameters that have been established. So that can be a calibration or an accuracy check. Calibration and accuracy checks are not the same thing. So calibration is, for very simple, for a scale. If you are in-house and the scale, you're checking to see if you have a test weight and it's 50 kilograms and it shows 48 kilograms, you're showing it's not accurate, but you probably can't fix it yourself. You're not necessarily able to calibrate it. You might have an outside service come in and be able to do that. So there's a difference there there that you need to make sure that you understand. Training to support the program would be records that would be also subject to that. And then it's not going to go perfectly as well. Sometimes things go wrong, sometimes there are corrections, and sometimes there are corrective actions. I'll explain the difference between those two in a moment, but you want to make sure that for when those circumstances occur, you're able to show objective evidence that those actions were appropriate and were taken and were verified. And then, of course, supporting validation studies. How did you determine in the first place what the parameters are, what the procedures are going to be, and that they're actually working? So all of those together will come and support the activity, not just the actual monitoring that you're doing at a stated frequency. So, as I stated, sometimes things go wrong. You could have missing outcomes. There could be falsification. I've been to some sites where those outcomes were put in advance. It was noon. They were supposed to do a sanitation activity, check it every hour, and those outcomes are pre-filled out 3 hours in advance. At that point, you've lost integrity. If you can't believe that, what else can't you believe? That's a big problem. Or you've probably experienced this yourself. You go and you see John Doe out there and he's doing 20 things at once. The record's blank and they're like, yeah, I have it up here. I'll remember it, I'll do it in an hour, and I'll put all the information down there. It's not going to happen correctly. And now, under the new FSMA regulations specifically, when we teach the PCQI courses, we explain that you can't do that. You have to be able to record these things as they occur, make sure they're credible. Out of specification results. I've looked at records after the fact. I've questioned them, whether it's internally or at other sites, and sites are so excited to show that they have records. This is done. I've done this every week. I've done it every hour. But they're out of specification, and nobody caught them. And they have a deer in the headlights look at that point, and they're actually shocked. Out of context, meaning that this study was for a specific type of purpose, maybe for a continuous type of process, and this one is manual or vice versa, and you're doing the wrong activity or using the wrong procedure. At that point, you have a breach. A program failure from start to finish where the wheels have fallen off the cart. And also at multiple levels of verification. So you might have the actual operator performing the task, a supervisor, and then somebody above that, and everybody might miss something because people are going through motion. So it's really important to ensure that you're not just on autopilot and you're actually looking at the records and challenging them. So some examples of nonconformities could be that when something went wrong, nobody did anything about it. So we had an ATP that had an unfavorable result, and you had to re-clean 3, 4, 5 times before it was properly cleaned, or maybe it wasn't at all, and people just continued and just gave up, and nobody noticed it. Cross connections. I've actually found this twice in my auditing career. The second time I really was ready to put my foot in my mouth because I was telling them this story, and then we went there and we actually saw it happening, and this is with chemicals that are hooked up to, sometimes you call it a dosatron, et cetera, where you might have a floor cleaner, a sanitizer, a surfactant, et cetera. They were hooked up incorrectly, and we had the floor cleaner and the sanitizer cross-connected, and so we were just flabbergasted. And so at that point, people weren't aware of it, which kind of shocked me because they're different colors, different viscosities, but these things can happen. Temperature and time. Looking at those records and seeing, well, this is supposed to be quat, and I see steam coming out as somebody's filling up that pail. Well, chemistry there, we're burning it off, and we're winding now with an ineffective sanitizer. The wrong concentration. I've seen it where it's 0. Or I've seen it where it's 800 and it was meant for the floor rather than a food contact surface. And at that point, we have that problem of residual chemical on the food contact surface. Misuse of utensils, things we take for granted every day. A lot of sites will have a white food contact brush. I've seen those used in the toilet. Or I've seen vice versa, a black drain brush or a red brush for a non-food contact surface and sanitary surface used in production. And then improper storage, cross-contamination of chemicals, sanitizers, cleaners stored with transmission fluid, hydraulic fluid, etc. So clarification on corrections versus corrective action. So correction, short-term fix, kind of like a Band-Aid, put out the immediate fire, but it doesn't address the root cause, and we could have repeating issues. Sometimes I call it the Homer Simpson syndrome, ow, quit it, doing it over and over again, and a lot of times the right hand doesn't talk to the left, and we wind up repeating those mistakes. A lot of time, a lot of errors, reputation could be at stake. Taking that further, corrective action addresses the root cause to prevent recurrence. So we found out why the fire happened, and we addressed that, whether it's with personnel, whether it's with a specific procedure. Corrections for sanitation preventive controls can sometimes be accepted in lieu of corrective action, except when it's tied to recurrence. So these types of preventive controls under FSMA are a little bit different than process preventive controls, or what we formerly called CCPs. Sometimes it can be a little bit of a tweak if we don't have a pattern. So if for some reason we have sanitizer, it's been out there for half a day, and somebody's checking it, it's not the proper strength, they can wind up remixing it again and using the appropriate amount. But if they find that's happening over and over again, we want to prevent that from happening so we don't have to keep addressing that. And at that point, we might need to raise that to a corrective action. Of course, it would still need to be a corrective action. If for some reason somebody missed it and that affected product later on, we would need to elevate that, and that would be considered a breach. So examples of simple corrections, or that short-term fix or a Band-Aid, could be re-cleaning a soiled area that we noticed wasn't fully cleaned, remixing chemicals that weren't at the proper concentration, or adjusting the water temperature to make sure it's in the correct range. Corrective action examples, so that's again where we need to do an investigation, find out what's going on, and address the root cause. It could wind up being a revised sanitation standard operating procedure, or maybe changing the types of utensils that are being used. Could be training or a combination of both, but don't fall into the trap and the knee-jerk reaction of always just doing training. So you could look on the web, you can find 483s out there. The FDA notices where sites had violations, and there was one major food company, you can find them pretty quickly, that put training as their corrective action, and it wasn't really addressing the true issues at hand, and the FDA actually rejected that. Changing the types of chemicals, the types of equipment you're using, but anytime you're making any kind of changes to procedures that were already validated, at that point you might need to, you'll actually need to then revalidate that procedure because you have variables in there. Or if you're constantly applying corrective action, or there's significant customer complaints, et cetera, at that point again you would need to revalidate that preventive control. Questions? And I thank you very much.